All right. It was very weak. I can't seem to hit it like I used to. All right, welcome everybody to the, yes, it's October 1st meeting. Today our invocation is going to be by Hunter McCarty and Pledge and Four-Way Test by Jared Taxley.
Please pray with me. We invoke your blessing on this meeting and upon our being together. The joy of the Lord is our strength. We enjoy the fellowship we find here as it makes us feel more regal than feeble. Help us to enjoy doing good, supporting, and encouraging one another. Comfort and relieve your sick servants, especially Bill Coes, Sherry Lang, Bob Elephant, and Robert and Dottie Fiddler, and give your power of healing to those who minister to their needs. Help us during our struggle for justice and truth to confront one another without hatred or bitterness and to work together with mutual forbearance and respect. Thank you, Lord, for this good group and for letting us know that those great among us must first become great in serving others. Bless us with the pure pleasure of service and the joy of giving. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now the four-way test for things we think, say, and do. 2. 3rd. And 4.
Beneficial to all concerned.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, actually. Before we get started today, we do have one visiting Rotarian that I would like to introduce to the group. We have Harvey Baxter from the Rotary Club of Baker County in Gainesville, Florida. So he is a Commodore in Gatorland, sitting here with Rod Freeman today. So glad to have you here, Harvey. Thank you for joining us. And I believe
Harvey?
that is the extent of our guests and visiting Rotarians.
All right. So good to see everybody here today. We've got a wonderful speaker and it is just gorgeous outside, so you can't ask for more, right? Happy Bucks. We're going to do second. Right now, we're going to do a moment. For those of you who may or may not know all the letters of this club, the BRC and the BRCCF and all that stuff, I thought what I would do is try to tell you the difference between our foundation, our charitable foundation, and our Rotary Club. Our Rotary Club is covered as a 501c4, which is a charitable foundation that's tax-free, but you can't get a tax deduction by giving to it, okay? And all Rotary clubs are covered underneath that. We are one of just a few Rotary clubs that have a foundation in our district. And our foundation is a 501c3, which is tax deductible, as well as a charitable foundation where you can have a charitable donation that's tax deductible for you. So that's why when we have our foundation drive coming up, it's really important for us to be able to give to the foundation because you can deduct that money. Our funds for the club as such are only operational funds. Pay for meals, pay for gifts for our speakers, the building, that sort of thing. So everything else, all the good that we do throughout the community and all the good that we do throughout the world is determined by the BRCCF, the Charitable Foundation. The Charitable Foundation has an entirely different board than we do, and those are the Board of Trustees. Tom is the president of the board this year. The chairman of the board is always the president of the club. And so there's a relationship between the two where everybody knows we're on the same page, but the money can only be released by the Board of Trustees. And the trustees are elected by members of the Board of Trustees. Does that make any sense to everybody? The trustees are elected by the Board of Trustees. So those who have been on the BRCCF who would understand that the person they would elect would also be a good trustee and understand what goes on with the board. In other words, somebody who already knew all what I'm telling you right now. Okay, all right. So there you go. If you got any extra questions, Jane can answer them for you. She's getting ready to have her, she's getting ready to have her annual drive. So get ready to think about what you would be willing to give to our BRCCF this year and be generous in your heart. All right. Speaking of giving things once a year, we have World Polio Day coming up on October 24th. So we also have the Purple Pinkies back, which are the donuts that signify having had a vaccination for polio. So you can order 10 Purple Pinkies per box at, I think they're 25 a box. And so it results in 180 points if you give that, because the Gates Foundation matches that, and also district will match. So I sent out an email, you should have gotten it, on how to order those. And this year, we're not going to pick up for you. You'll have to pick them up, but you can pick up almost anywhere in Nashville, depending upon where you are, and order as many as you can, because it all comes back to you and it all comes back to the club. So it's a win-win. And more importantly, it all comes back to work with polio. And given how Afghanistan's going right now, we really need to give a lot of money to make sure that we can see about getting somebody in there. All right. Cell phones off again. Just a quick reminder, we had a couple go off last week, but not too bad. Pancake Committee, John Helm, we're going to meet right after this. So John, where are you going to meet? Right over here in the corner. We are planning on having Pancake Day, and we'll see how well that works out. All right. Any other announcements before we see our speaker? All right. Zach Benner, would you please introduce our speaker? Oh, yeah, let's do Happy Bucks first. Sorry about that. Keep me straight, Mr. Assistant District Governor.
I will go first. I should have already done this. I feel bad. My youngest son was married 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Love my new daughter-in-law, but that's for him. And then also, when I leave here, I'm leaving to go up to north of town to End Slavery's new campus, which we take possession of today. So real
Yay.
excited.
Nice.
Big tablecloth, October, breast cancer awareness.
Thank you, Larry. More Happy Bucks. Alan. Alan Treadway. Up. Tom Carr.
Yeah. Well, this isn't a happy, but this is more of a recognition. So this week I watched a Netflix series on 9/11, and I was hoping Brian Goss would be here, but we just had our picnic, and they lost 400 first responders that day, and those guys went into those buildings and they knew they weren't coming out. And so that we have that kind of courage and fidelity in our public service. And I believe that's true of our Brentwood Fire Department. I think they come, if my house is falling down around me, I think if they're there, they're going to come in and get me. So, just think about them and that courage and bravery. So that's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell you what, who's your favorite team? All right, wrong answer. I tell you what, it's the special week, and I'm going to tell you this. You watch it tomorrow, Ole Miss beats Alabama straight up.
Oh.
I would say I'm excited for numerous things. Okay. I was excited for numerous things. This past weekend, I went to Florida for some training and had some great connections and met a lot of cool people. And then I'm really excited for the speaker and my good friend, Diane. You guys are in for a great treat. So really excited.
Cool.
Thanks, Zach.
I'm going to throw in $1 just to say thank you to Larry Kane for the golf tournament this week and for the great job that you did.
Throw in $1 on top of Larry for the breast cancer. 18 years ago, my wife was right in the middle of 8 chemos and is still alive and
Oh.
successful.
Anybody else?
All
Just
right.
knew we were gonna have more football.
I'm guarded.
Yeah, I'm a UT fan.
All right, thanks, Steve. And now, Zach, will you introduce our speaker?
All right. So Diane Canada lost her brother, a special ops Marine who served in Afghanistan, to PTSD before Christmas about 6 years ago. About 2 years into that healing process, she felt God tugging on her heartstrings for public service. With trembling knees, she obeyed that call and ran for Tennessee House of Representatives in 2020. She set out to win back the Beth Hartwell seat against a well-heeled Democrat incumbent who outfunded her 10-1. The underdog who surprised the regime with little help from the Republican Party, she nearly won, finishing with 46% of the vote in a very split district. Diane is a faith-based speaker and author, a professional songwriter, and a podcast host. She inspires women with her signature message, Lady Up and Don't Quit, which is the title of her new book. Diane believes that we are all soldiers in God's army, but some of us are his special ops, and we are needed in the front lines. Diane is currently serves as the public relations chairman for the Nashville Republican Women's Club, the largest Republican women's club in the state of Tennessee. She is a founding board member of the American Bible Project, an effort to put Bibles back into the U.S. schools. She has served as the Nashville political advocate for the National Association of Women Business Owners. She has served on the Mayor's Minority Business Advisory Council in the city of Nashville. She was voted a Volunteer of the Year for her work in teaching entrepreneurial skills in the Tennessee Prison for Women. Diane teaches Christian women how to enhance their influence in America communities at the grassroots level is an effort to return our country back to our founding principles. She is convinced that women will be instrumental in the fight for the soul of our country, and she is passionate about equipping them with a special fight. Y'all, I'm so excited and privileged to call Diane a friend and to introduce her to our Rotary today. Her talk is going to tug at your heartstrings. It's going to resonate with many of you. She's going to inspire you. She's going to inspire you to push through those hard times. And so you always tell yourself, don't quit. And without further ado, please help me welcoming Miss Diane Canada.
Good morning. Thank you so much. That was so kind. What a lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. So glad to be with y'all this morning. So I have a question for you. How many of y'all have heard people say kids are resilient? How many of y'all believe that? Okay, these are the folks that have not spent years in therapy like I have to undo the trauma of childhood. We believe in this concept of resiliency and it drives us, right? But I want to challenge that for you today, all right? We think that kids are resilient. We think that our heroes, like those in the military, are resilient. They go into literal war zones, see the worst of humanity, and then they come back to civilian life and just pick up where they left off, right? We lose 22 veterans a day to suicide. And like Zach mentioned, my brother was one of those. He came back after serving several tours in Afghanistan. We all have Afghanistan on our mind heavily right now. And he was haunted by night terrors and by this PTSD. He woke up my parents one night. He was at their house. And my dad could hear these strange commands coming from across the house. And he got up to look. He told my mom, just stay where you're at. And he got up and he went out into the living room and he was searching. He could hear my brother shouting and he was crouched down behind one of their house plants with a fully loaded gun, shouting commands down the hallway right in front of their bedroom. And my dad very gently said, Matt, you're home, bud. Wake up, you're home. He was in some kind of a trance. I don't know what happened, but as soon as he came to, he just started pouring tears down his face. He said, oh my God, I could have killed you. He would sleep on the floor. We would all say, Matt, sleep in your bed. He'd say, no, I don't deserve to sleep in my bed. My brothers and sisters are sleeping in ditches in Afghanistan right now. I don't need to sleep in a bed. And as this continued on, he would hear reports of his brothers, committing suicide. And he would always say to us, that's a coward's way out. I would never do that. Well, then one morning around 5 a.m., I got a call that I don't wish on anyone. I was his big sister. He was 16 years younger than me, so he was more like my son than my brother. My parents are hysterical. My brother decided to end it around 3 a.m. that morning. And I don't know how I made it to Atlanta through the tears, but it devastated our family. So I wouldn't say kids are resilient. I wouldn't say even the strongest, toughest of us out there are necessarily resilient. I would say that it's probably better defined as, well, let me just let you be the judge. I looked up the definition of resiliency, and this is what it said. The ability to return to an original shape after being pulled, stretched, pressed, and bent. So I propose to you today that maybe objects are resilient, but people aren't, because I don't think that you ever go back to your original shape. When we're stretched and we're exposed to difficult conditions, impossible situations, even if we're pulled apart inside, we never go back to our original shape. We are different people. We don't even look the same in the mirror, right? We can see the wear and tear on our face after something tough that we've been through. We have scars on our bodies, right? A truer statement, I think, would be that our experiences shape us and our capacity expands for what we can handle. When it comes to the hard stuff, we can't unsee or unknow the things that we've experienced. Can't unfeel the depths of the pain that we encounter. But here's the good news, now that I've depressed you completely. Here's the good news. It also applies to accomplishments. When you're stretched, when you step out of your comfort zone and you do something new, something where you're trembling and shaking and you don't think you can do it, but you push past that. God said that we are not to fear. He didn't say we wouldn't feel fear. We're just not supposed to let it stop us. So when you push past that and you do it afraid, your capacity also expands. And I can prove it to you. Have you ever been around a family member who's known you all your life, and you've stretched and you've grown and you've done some things that are maybe a little outside of what other members of your family have been brave enough to attempt? You go back for Thanksgiving dinner, let's just say, and you're sitting with that person and they start to ask you about your life, and you can tell that you guys are on two different pages. Do you ever shrink a little and you just kind of downplay or minimize the things you've done because you don't want to make them feel bad? Anybody ever done that? Yeah. So that's proof that we never return to our original shape. Our capacity just expands. So Zach mentioned that I believe all of us are soldiers in God's army, but some of us are the special ops. And I like to attribute that back to my brother, my special ops Marine. He's taught me a lot, even in his death. I think some of us are called to the front lines. We're all soldiers. We all have a part to play, but you all here, you're leaders in your community. I think many of you here are God's special ops. So where do you get your SEAL training? I think that just like the SEALs do, it's in those experiences where we feel like we're going to die, right? Where we feel like we can't handle one more minute, when we're pushed to our absolute limit. And then we rise to that defining moment. You've had one, if not more than one, defining moment in your life. We're going to tap into that today. So when I was 8 years old, I had known a life very similar to the Cleavers. You know, my father was a pastor. My mom was the typical pastor's wife. We were at the church every time the doors were open. We moved around a lot. I went to 22 schools before high school, planting churches, but we were always within the church. At 8 years old, my dad decided he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore, and he left us for another woman. Who does that as a pastor? I was daddy's girl, so it was devastating, absolutely devastating for all of us. But for me, it took decades for me to sort through that emotional war zone in my life. I think dads are charged with teaching their daughters their value, especially in the eyes of a man. And when dad decides to go, and no judgment there, he had his own path to take. But it does leave an emotional war zone for those left behind, because I didn't know how to navigate it. I just continued to make decisions that exacerbated it, right? That just made it worse. Certainly wasn't helping myself with the decisions I was making. I chunked all my college plans, which were pretty intense. I had gone through a lot of college level courses in high school, graduated 6 months ahead of my class. I was headed into broadcasting. That was what I wanted to do. And because the war zone at home got so hard to navigate, out of desperation, I left and got married at 17. A couple years later, I had my son. And a couple years after that, I realized I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. And honestly, he did too. I wasn't exactly a bed of roses to live with at that time. So because I had grown up the way I did, I didn't want my son or our divorce to end up looking like it did with my parents, because it was a tug of war. It was a really nasty experience. So I wanted to be amicable. I wanted us to all get along. We decided we don't need lawyers. Oh, I was so naive. We don't need lawyers. We can just work it out on our own. So we had this little arrangement over a summer where he was going to have my son for a few weeks while I was going to dive into kind of setting myself up and getting into a new place. And we lived a state apart, but it was only about 2 hours apart. So I was supposed to have him every weekend. He was going to keep him during the week. And that was our arrangement. Well, 3 weeks in a row, just to make the story very short, I have it all written out in my book, but 3 weeks in a row, he had excuses on why I couldn't come. My parents are coming in town from Wisconsin. Can you just come next week? The next one, oh, it's my company picnic. I really want to take him to the picnic. Can you just come next? I'm like, Bob, and I'd been a stay-at-home mom. I was really mad. I'm like, at this point, I'm frustrated, but I'm trying to get along. The third week, he calls me again with the next excuse, wants to take him camping. I said, you know what? You have my son ready. I'm going to be there to pick him up in 2 hours. No, I'm done being amicable. As I'm walking out the door to go pick him up, I get a call from an attorney. She said, I'm sorry, no, you won't be picking up your son today. We've filed for full custody on grounds of abandonment. In Virginia, where we were living at the time, all you had to do was keep a parent away for 3 weeks to prove abandonment. I didn't know that. So we go to court. I'm at a table by myself because no lawyer would touch my case. He's over there with a team of attorneys. The judge could obviously tell what was going on, because if I'd abandoned my child, why am I sitting in her courtroom? She could tell what just went down. But her hands were tied. The law was on her side. She granted him temporary custody. She said, this will be temporary for a year. We'll revisit it. Well, within that year, he moved him 1,000 miles away, back up to his hometown where he had all the family support. Judge is all tied up. So for the next 18 years, not without a valiant effort, I did not get my son back. The story didn't end. I can't tell you that that was a happy ending. Okay. But what it did do was it taught me a lot about my faith. Initially, I went into a fetal position. There's no pain like losing your child. I would be out about with my friends and I would see another woman that had a child around his age and I would just crumble like a baby. I didn't feel like I could even move. The shock, I think, just took over. And I think that whole time was just like a blur. I can just tell you it was just like a blur. So I found myself in this emotional war zone, right? And through all this smoke of destruction, I felt like I was bleeding out. I felt like I was crawling around bumping into walls, unable to stand back up. How many of you have ever been in a war zone where you feel like that? Anybody ever been to those depths? Yeah. So at first I tried to numb it in every way you can possibly imagine. Found out there was no real sustaining relief from that, so that wasn't a good idea. It was a really dark place, but here's the beauty of God. No matter how deep of a hole you're in, his arm is long enough to reach in there and pull you out. And that's when he started doing that for me. I walked into the living room of the place where I was staying. I was staying with a girlfriend trying to recover. And she had a man sitting in the living room that I didn't recognize. I was just going to kind of walk on past. You know how you do. Like, you really weren't in the mood to visit with anybody. But she said, come back in here, please. And she introduces me to this man. And it was her pastor. And now keep in mind, my daddy, who was a pastor, had walked out. I wasn't real keen on pastors. And I really felt ambushed. I was really angry that she had set this meeting up. She begged me to just sit down. She said, will you just sit down and we just listen for a minute? And so very reluctantly, I agreed to do that. All I can remember is this one poignant moment where he just kind of leaned in and he said, has the world beat you up enough out there yet? If you need to stay out there a little bit longer, you go ahead. He says, but if you're tired and if you're ready to come home, your Father is waiting. Your Heavenly Father is waiting. And he just reached his hand out to me. And I, again, just crumbled like a baby. And I took his hand, and it was very metaphoric in taking my Heavenly Father's hand. And that's when everything started to turn around. I went from floundering and crawling around to all of a sudden I had spunk, right? All of a sudden I had the courage to fight. I reached for a career that I was completely unqualified for. I'm like, okay, if this is the reality, this is what we've got to do, then I've got to make a certain amount of money. I got to get my butt in gear. I got to come up with the fees to fight this. I got to travel 1,000 miles. I got to pay for airline tickets and hotels and rental cars and child support because he was coming after me for that, everything. So I got it in gear and I reached out for a management position in a medical practice that by the grace of God I got. I was the youngest person on a very progressive team of nearly 15 women and somehow got the management position in Buckhead, Atlanta. And from that point, it started my career and it ended me up where I'm at now today. So never underestimate, I will tell you the first takeaway today, never underestimate the favor of God because he goes before you and he creates these paths. He just knocks down doors that you couldn't possibly open on your own. So for 18 years, while a lot of my friends were saving for retirement, taking vacations, all that, I was spending my money running roads back and forth from Atlanta, eventually Nashville to Wisconsin. All my money went into that. I wasn't going to let that child grow up thinking that he was abandoned. I knew how that felt. I was at every spelling bee, theater, production, you name it, I was there. Now, some of you say, why didn't you move there? Read the book. There's a whole explanation behind that, but that's not why we're here today. Now, your why has to be big enough to drive you at all times. My why was very clear. I'd like to ask you today what yours is. What's driving you today? Do you have a big enough why? Years later, in a quiet moment with my ex, I would force myself to get along, took whatever I had to take off of him to be able to have a relationship with my son. And one day we're sitting in this quiet moment and I asked him, I just want to know why. Like, why did you do that? There's no courtroom, there's no judge. I just want to know, sitting here in this truck, why did you take my child away from me? He said, you really want to know? I said, I really do. He said, I didn't want the divorce and I knew how much you loved him. And I thought if I had him, you would have no choice but to come back to me. Well, that ain't going to happen. So I'd love to tell you that there's a good resolve on that. We're still working through it. My son has a lot of pain, but I'm here for him. He knows I love him. The love is there. The pain doesn't go away. Sometimes when we go through really tragic things, it's not that the pain goes away. It's just, it doesn't cripple you anymore. Adversity, I say, is fuel. It's not kryptonite. For a long time, I let it be my kryptonite. It felt ludicrous to me to allow myself to be happy. Like, how could I be happy? How could I walk around with a smile on my face when I've lost my child? I felt guilty as a mother, like I can't be happy after that. But God taught me that he's got my son in his arms too. He's his child, ultimately. He's got all of us. He taught me that the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's not a giddy thing. It's not that we walk around giggly and bubbly and all the time. It's just an inner knowing that whatever life throws at you, God's going to work it for good somehow, that somehow it's going to work out, even if we can't see it. He taught me how to tap into his peace. And that is what allows me to smile again. And a genuine smile is really contagious. People want it. People are drawn to it. And in this day and time right now that we're in, this political climate that we're in, God knows we need people with genuine smiles, kind eyes, say a lot right now. I want y'all to do me a favor. I want y'all to close your eyes for a minute, if you will. And I want you to imagine that it's been raining for several days, that it's been coming down in sheets. The skies have been really gray. There's a chill in the air. Now imagine that the rain is starting to dry up and the clouds are parting. The sun's starting to peek through. You look up and you see a double rainbow. The sun feels warm on your face and you smile. Just soak up that feeling for a minute. And you can open your eyes. I liken that to the transformation that goes on inside of us when we've come out of adversity. It's the sun after the rain. God put us here for a time such as this. All of us right now have a purpose. Some of us are in emotional war zones right now. Some of us know people who are going through them. But we're here as God's special ops. I often say that I got to know God's heart on those roads back and forth to Wisconsin. That's where I learned that he's faithful. It's where I learned that he can be trusted, that he provides the only way out of our emotional war zones. Losing my brother allowed space in my heart for God to call me to public service. That was never on my radar, never in a million years. But I cooperated, got thrown into the deep end of the pool, cooperated with God and learned to swim, ran for the State House of Representatives. Had never run for office before. People thought I was out of my mind. I thought I was too. But I saw America through God's eyes because I wasn't part of the establishment. I wasn't a country club girl, all of that. I was able to look at things a lot more objectively. When I grew up, after my dad left, my mom became a governess for an affluent family in Atlanta. So I went to the country clubs. We stayed weekends all the time at the mansion. We raised their children. So I was around it and saw it up close and personal, but I wasn't a part of it. So I have very stark contrast. We would leave there and come home to our apartment with literally a can of chicken soup in the cabinet. My mom would split it between my sister and I and claim that she wasn't hungry after we've just come from all this abundance, this country club life. Okay, so I've seen both sides. I'm starting a Reunite America Academy with Dr. Ming Wang. Maybe some of you know him. He and I have teamed up to start this academy because we want to bring values, Christian values, back into the modern conversation. We want to engage with people that don't look like us or live like us. We need to start bringing a healing to America. We need to start checking our own selves in the mirror. But this all would not have come about had I not lost my brother. So that's what I mean when I say God can bring good out of tragedy. He's got a 9-year-old son, my little nephew, Jackson. And when I see the trajectory right now of this division in our country, it breaks my heart for him. That's another why for me now. So I'm a special op in God's army. I think a lot of you are too. It's tough to keep your want to when you look around right now. If you're tired, your motivation and your energy have been depleted. But here's a quote that I will wrap up with here. Isaiah 40:31, one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. It says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They'll run and not grow weary. They will walk and they will not faint." whatever you're doing today, remember that we're not living for any other reason. I have learned to live for an audience of one. He's faithful. He can be trusted. And no matter what it is that you're doing, we can't quit because we can't quit on God's purpose for us. The world will give you a million reasons to quit. But if you're living for that audience of one, you'll stay in the game. If your why is big enough, you'll stay in. I wasn't going to give up on my child. I'm not going to give up on Jackson. I'm not going to give up on America. I'm certainly not going to give up on God's purpose for my life. So as I said earlier, I don't think there's any such thing as human resilience. But I do think that our capacity for what we can handle expands when we cooperate. We cooperate with God. Our hearts expand. You'd be amazed how much compassion you can have for the unlovable in your life when you start letting God expand your heart with compassion. You have a choice to be bitter or better, and that's your option. We're never the same after a hardship or a trauma, but we can't do it alone. And though it's not easy, I will tell you, it's not easy. You can't do it in your own strength, but if you tap into him, then there's an ease. It's not easy, but there is an ease to it. You'll be able to do it with the wind at your back, with an ease, if you're walking in his purposes. So if you want to hear more about my story, I've got some books in the back. Be happy to sign one for you. If you've got daughters, nieces, that's usually what happens. People start buying them for their daughters in their lives. I'll be more than happy to personally sign them for you. I'd love to share the rest of the story. That is a fraction of the emotional war zones that I've walked through. But I just can tell you that you got to quit. You got to not quit. You just have to decide today, get in touch with your why, make sure it's big enough. And whatever you do, don't quit. Thank y'all.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have a gift for you for coming today.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice. This is sort of part of our why, actually. We share books with first graders and read the books to them. And this actually has a little bit about our four-way test that we recited at the beginning. And so what we like to do is have you sign the front of that book, and the pen is yours to keep.
Okay.
And we will, when we read to the children, we also end up telling them a little bit about you and your why. So if you would sign that, we would appreciate that. And we really appreciate
Wonderful.
that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. So right here?
Anywhere you want.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you so much. That's good. All right. We're going to do a little few announcements, and then we have the Pancake Day Committee meeting. Remember that. Harvey, good to see you again. And now I actually have a little quote sort of follows what we're doing today. One of my favorite folks in the entertainment business is Steve Martin. He's one of the most talented individuals I've ever known. The guy can play a banjo like nobody else, and not to mention he's a pretty good actor and a pretty good writer. And so I think this quote is a perfect reflection for his success, and I hope that y'all will all subscribe to it. Be so good they can't ignore you. Remember that for the rest of the week. Please help put up the tables and chairs, the chairs against the wall, tables up, and anything else for the good of Rotary. If not, thank you, Diane. We appreciate you again so much. Thank you. All right, see you next week. We're adjourned.